Hi, and welcome to The Capsule Life, a show for the most casual and dedicated fans of comics and a member of the Comic Watch family. I'm your host, Sean. Join me and discover what the world of comics and graphic novels have to offer. From one-on-one interviews with industry professionals, roundtable discussions with passionate fans, and reviews on the latest comics, TV shows, and movies. Now let's dive right on in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. In today's episode, we are going to talk about Will Eisner Week, which takes place this year from March 1st through the 7th, so it's about a month away, and it celebrates the life of Will Eisner's contribution to comics and graphic novels, and there's been events for Will Eisner Week that's been hosted around the world, and it's been hosted at places such as libraries, schools, museums, colleges and universities, comic book stores, even pubs and restaurants. Now, if you don't know who Will Eisner is or the week that's dedicated to him, that's completely fine because we're going to discuss this with a special guest today, and that is Danny Fingeroth. Danny is a popular culture critic and historian, a longtime executive editor and writer at Marvel Comics with notable works such as Dark Hawk and Spider-Man, and award-winning author of several books such as The Marvelous Life, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee, Superman on the Couch, What Superheroes Really Tell Us About Ourselves and Our Society, and Disguised as Clark Kent, Jews, Comics, and the Creation of the Superhero. He is currently working on books about iconic 20th century figures Bob Dylan and Jack Ruby. He also works with the Eisner Studios and Foundation and serves as the chair of Will Eisner Week. Danny Fingeroth, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am hanging in there. I'm doing okay. It's been, a very long week for me. So,
okay. Well, me too.
I bet. Yeah.
Somehow the past 3 years, every week has been long. Just in the strange world we live in now. I want to just put one quick footnote in introduction.
Yeah.
All that stuff about Will Eisner Week, where it's celebrated, and of course we'll talk about it, but also online, because especially since the advent of COVID, we have some special options, the pre-prepared material with very cool people that we have for Will Eisner Week. But anyway, that's so.
No, that's great to know. Yeah, that's great and great to share. So yeah, no, that makes total sense as well too. So thank you. I have to share with you, reading your bio.
Yeah.
You have a couple of books about, Jewish creators in comics and how much they've, made an impact on the industry. And what's funny is just last week, I had an episode about Jewish representation in comics, and I had somebody on the show to talk about that. I'm sorry.
Who'd you have on?
Her name is Shasha Kaplan. She is a contributor for Comic Watch, which is what this podcast is part of, that website where we review comics and films and stuff like that as well too. And so she's a commentator as well too, and has done a lot of studies on she just finished her master's in history actually, but she's has a lot of experience and has a lot of just a lot of things to say about it. It's a really good conversation. So if you ever want to check it out, I definitely encourage you to listen to that.
Sasha interviewed me a few months ago for, I guess.
Oh, did she really?
Yeah.
What a small world. That's funny. Yes. I'll let her know that you're on the show tonight.
Okay. Yeah, please do. Hi, Sasha. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with every guest I have on the show, I always like to start with the same question. And that question is, what's your comic book origin story? What was it that got you into comics? Was it a person? Was it an event? Was it an issue or anything like that? What kind of got you into comics and where you're at today?
Boy, this is to go way back. I guess it goes back to Popeye,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Popeye and my cousin Steve. I think as a little kid, I watched Popeye cartoons, and so my parents bought me Popeye comic books, and somehow I learned to read pretty early. But I think my mom, sort of this vague, very hazy memory, my mom reading me Popeye comics that were put out maybe by Gold Key, and somewhere around there, my cousin Steve, who, if you live in New England, might at some point have done some dental work on you. But before he was doing dental work, he was a comics fan. I somehow have a memory of him giving me a bunch of comics, including adventure comics featuring Superboy. so, but and I also lived in a world where you get the Sunday paper that always had comics in it, and it was
Hmm.
a very it was just a ubiquitous medium. But as far as comic books, I think those would be the start. So probably the superhero stuff would have been Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the DC pantheon. I didn't have much interest in. I like some humor stuff, but I didn't have much interest in westerns or war comics or romance. I was mostly, I definitely was intrigued by the superhero, and then the Marvel. I was the perfect age
Hmm.
for Marvel comics to begin. When there is, if you kind of look through the history of people who've worked at and for Marvel, there's a
Hmm.
large clump of baby boomers, if you pardon the expression, um, who were born in the early to mid 50s,
Right.
because we were and I think the reason for that is we were 8, 9, 10 years old when Fantastic Four #1 came out, and it just blew our
Hmm.
minds because we had never, in comic book years and in kid years, if you've been reading comics for 3 or 4 years, well, that's half your life, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so you think you're jaded, you know everything, and then suddenly these Marvel comics come out. So that's and I would say that I had some, and then I went to a small school with about 50 kids in my grade, and maybe there were two or three others who were into comics, and then some kids at summer camp. But I don't know if we had a club, but we definitely there was something that bonded us, that we were the people who didn't just read comics for a year or two, but we read them and stuck with them.
Hmm.
Um, I grew up in New York City, so at one point when I was in junior high school, my friend David and I went to the Marvel offices and tried to get in to meet Stan, and we thought everybody worked in the bullpen, and we
Hmm.
we were stopped from getting in by the legendary Flo Steinberg, who was very nice and gave us like the thing that became a pinup in one of the comics of the Fantastic Four by Kirby and Ayers. She gave us a black and white thing, which of course, from the company's point of view, was a lot cheaper to give us a black and white printout. And for us, it was like, woohoo, a coloring thing.
Right. Yeah.
We can be like the professionals. We can color it. So that's my art. I'm not sure how. I went. Then I became pretty strictly a Marvel guy. Also read Undergrounds. Became a movie person. Studied film in college, and part of that sort of they used comics as sort of to show us the similarities between movies and comics. And
Hmm.
I'd sort of given up mainstream comics when I got to probably about when I got to college. It sort of the luster was off. I think Marvel had settled into a formula and was repeating itself. And in retrospect, I can see that the people working on them were very talented professionals doing very good work, but it didn't have that explosive impact, and for me anymore. You
Right.
know, that the stuff that the first stuff. Graduated college, came back home as one does.
Hmm.
Home happened to be New York City,
Hmm.
and I thought, gee, what am I going to do? I have this very interesting, but not necessarily um, commercial college degree. Well, it might be fun to work at Marvel Comics for a few months. I knew somebody who knew somebody who could get me in there on an informational tour, and
Hmm.
that I ended up getting a job as Larry Lieber's assistant. Larry, of course, is Stan Lee's brother,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Larry had just come back from, if you know your comics history, Larry had left Marvel to go. Martin Goodman had started a rival company
Uh-huh.
called Atlas Seaboard.
Hmm.
Larry had been the editor in chief there, but then that company folded, and Larry came back and he was running what was called the British department. It was a line of reprint, mostly reprint, some new material
Hmm.
comics done for the black and white British weekly market. And he needed an assistant, and so that was my entry into being a comic book professional, and particularly working at Marvel,
Hmm.
where I worked for the next 18 years.
Oh
And
man,
as
that's
you know, I then after Larry, I worked with Louise Simonson and Jim Shooter, and eventually I became the editor and group editor of the Spider-Man line,
yeah.
and wrote a lot of comics with Spider-Man, Darkhawk, and so on.
Right. That's amazing. So you weren't even trying to get into Marvel Comics, like intentionally after college. That was just something that you happened to go into and you just fell in love with it, right?
I had a few jobs. I didn't think I wanted to move to California,
Uh-huh.
and the New York comic industry, the New York film industry at that point was somewhat limited to mostly like industrials, commercial, and porn. And I didn't
Oh,
really,
okay.
and I had some assisting jobs in all those, literally schlepping, literally just like carrying stuff and moving stuff around and doing negative matching. Um, so I knew I wanted to be involved in some kind of creative field. But you're right. It, when I was a kid, of course, I did. I wanted to be Jack Kirby because that's sort
Right.
of as as much as I may have admired and enjoyed what Stan and Roy and everybody else did. It's a visual medium. When you're a kid, it's like that's the explosive thing. So I wanted, and I have some drawing ability, but not at a professional level. And I
Hmm.
didn't even know. So you're right. But I mean, you know, I, anything I was going to target as far as looking for a job after spending a year doing sort of just assisting type jobs or office type jobs. Um, this like I said, I didn't know it would become a full on career. I thought I would still perhaps do something with film or academics or even restaurant business. I was interested in cooking and food.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Um, but Marvel was, a strange but wonderful place.
Yeah.
It was, and it was a fascinating mix, for better or worse, of
Hmm.
the creative and the commercial. Right? I mean,
Hmm.
you did work with a lot of interesting, creative, imaginative, quirky people. And you did, there was that whole thing of working on the characters I grew up loving
Hmm.
in the comics. But then there were deadlines and salaries and vouchers and it was, and I liked that. I liked that it was neither all business nor was it all uh, purely head in the clouds creative.
Hmm.
I like that you could use your imagination and your creativity, but there was still a practical side. And you got this thing as good as you could get it, but it had to leave on Tuesday. I mean,
Yeah.
and in the comic company, it's funny. There was, in the days before you could transmit stuff digitally,
Uh-huh.
um, there there was literally, especially for the British stuff, we'd prepare the boards, but they'd publish it in England.
Okay.
So we would literally give it to a guy on a motorcycle who would
Hmm.
then have to like take it to the airport and get the boards to England.
Hmm.
And once in a while, this happened only once in the couple of years that I did that, it fell off the somehow, somewhere in transit, the boards got lost, and we had to recreate an entire issue overnight. That was very that was
No
exciting.
kidding.
It was, so that, but I mean, that does give you, you don't want to slack on something, but you have a deadline,
Hmm.
and you get for the monthly comic, you get 11 more times that year to get it right. And hopefully you get it right more than you get it wrong.
Right. Right. Yeah.
and, and and I'll just say that because of the nature, it's the nature of human nature, but certainly the nature of the fact that comics that you're doing them for, often, especially in those days, for children,
Right.
means that the thing that you make cringe when you look at and see in print, oh my God, how did that ever get out? Somebody will always come up to you at a convention and say, that changed my life. It's the greatest thing I ever read.
Oh, isn't that interesting? When you're talking about, having your head in clouds where you still have a deadline on Tuesday, that remind me, we had somebody on the show and I can't remember who it was, but I think this person said it really well and said that, sometimes a lot of people always wish that, they could perfect what they're working on more and, wish they just have more time. And the way that they've kind of accepted where they're at that made them feel good about what they put out is that they said, this is the best that I can do at that time.
Hmm.
And I think framing it like that I know it always helps me a lot, because even though that was more of a, artist and writer type of scenario that he was giving, it's actually helped me as a, general creative as well, too, to think about, I wish if I ever thought about, I wish I could do this, or I wish I could do that, or have more time, I kind of feel better about thinking it in terms of this was the best I could do given that amount of time and everything. And so I feel really good about that. And so that just kind of remind me of that saying that creator had said that has made me feel really good and appreciate what I've been able to create and not get harped on, it could have been better, or it could have been, if I only had more time, because it still was pretty good when you put it out there. And you just have to think about, you didn't have the time that you needed or wanted to be able to get it just right to what you have, but it was still pretty good at the end of the day. So
Exactly. Everything could be better and or just worried to death. I mean, that's
yeah, yeah,
at a certain point. If you keep working on something, it might lose the initial thing that it had, and that made you want to do it. It's very tricky, and the deadline is your friend.
right,
You
right,
know,
yeah,
because especially, I mean, look now in the digital era, you can rework things literally. Well, not literally, but
hmm,
virtually forever. So the fact that something has to come out um, in print, in a nuts and bolts, brick and mortar, whatever you want to call it, way, yeah,
right.
it's very good. I mean, there's films. Well, obviously, the films I made as a student, I could certainly go back and improve. But I mean, the idea that yeah, just finish it, get it as good as you can, move on, which is not, because that's how you get better. Is you keep doing more stuff, not going back and reworking,
Right,
something done over and over and over.
right, right. Exactly. Yeah. So, in talking about your work for Marvel and how you're known for not just your work as a writer and editor for Marvel, but also your books that you've authored as well too. As your bio states, that's what you're best known for. But you also work with the Eisner Studios of Foundation, so I wanted to ask you, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and what the Eisner Studios of Foundation does as well too, but what you do for them as well?
Okay, well, I'll go back a little bit to my origin because I think that's important.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, um, when I was 12, so those of you who are good at math can figure out exactly how old I am. Hint: do not believe Wikipedia. Um, um, when I was 12, Jules Pfeiffer put out a book called The Great Comic Book Heroes. You ever see that book?
I have not, no.
Oh, well, then, immediately after this, go online and get a copy. I'll tell you,
Okay.
you can, okay.
I will do that.
Yeah, there are different versions of it. Anyway, Jules Pfeiffer, you know that name? Jules Pfeiffer?
Sounds familiar, but
Okay.
it's
Uh,
not ringing a bell
Pfeiffer
right now.
actually connects directly to Eisner. Pfeiffer,
Okay, okay.
but Jules Pfeiffer is one of the most famous cartoonists in the world. So, and um, and started out in comics. Anyway, Pfeiffer put out a book called The Great Comic Book Heroes. It was in a pre-internet, pre-comic scholarship, in a totally different era.
Hmm.
It was 1965. It was less than 10 years after the Senate hearings on comics.
Right, right.
Uh,
Yeah.
This book, Great Comic Book Heroes, had a commentary by Jules Pfeiffer, who's a screenwriter, author, children's book author, cartoonist, graphic novelist, just turned 94, still going strong.
Oh, wow. Great.
And so this was the first time most people in my generation had seen excerpts from the 1930s and 40s comics.
Okay.
The Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman,
Hmm.
Captain America, half a dozen Plastic Man, Hawkman, and the Spirit.
Hmm.
I had never heard of the Spirit.
Hmm.
Spirit had stopped publishing in 1952,
Hmm.
before I was born. Um, and I was blown away. I mean, the whole book. I think the book stands the test of time. Pfeiffer's a very good writer, and his insights are. So, he worked anyway. So the Spirit. What the hell is the Spirit? I've never seen this before. It's certainly not Superman or Batman,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm digging it. It's like an 7 or 8 page story, full of atmosphere and drama.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I wanted to know more. And then I don't think I was alone because, and this was at a pivotal time in Will Eisner's life and career where he was sort of. So anyway, so that was my introduction to the Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
and then sort of in at that period, the Batman TV show would debut in early '66,
Right.
and so there was this whole quote unquote camp movement, and this idea that that comic books they will still look down on, but they would look like as kind of quaint, funny, old time kid stuff, like the
Mm-hmm.
Batman show was. But but that Stan started calling the Marvel comics Marvel Pop Art Productions for a few months.
Okay.
Um, and Harvey Comics put out two large size, large in terms of many pages,
Mm-hmm.
compilations of Spirit reprints, that Eisner worked on with Harvey Comics. So I got
Mm-hmm.
those, and I learned more and more. And so, so then, and at that same period, Eisner was discovering. We were talking about the late '60s or into the early '70s.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the Spirit? So anyway, Will Eisner, who I'll explain in a minute, then decided he wanted to know. He had been doing comics for industrial and government clients. He had gone from doing the Spirit. Okay, Will, I'll wind back further. 19 whatever the early 20th century. Will Eisner is born in 1917.
Okay.
He was born in Brooklyn. His family moved to the Bronx. Uh, bitterly poor. I think he had a brother, and I think he had a sister as well. Um, and Eisner was gifted as an artist. He was the artist in his school newspaper. He went to DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx, where a lot of comic Bob Kane, Stan Lee, Erwin Hazen, Bill Finger,
Mm-hmm.
that was just the many comic and other fields creators and professionals went there. It was an all boys school
Mm-hmm.
in the Bronx. So Eisner did a lot of the art for his high school paper. He ended up doing advertising work, and then he ran into Bob Kane on the street one day. Bob Kane gave him a tip on where to find some work, and um, there he met a guy named Jerry Iger. Together they formed a studio called the Eisner and Iger Studio.
Mm-hmm.
Packaged comics. There were comics having that first big boom post Superman.
Right.
Comics have been around for years. They were doing fine.
Mm-hmm.
Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, who you should talk to his granddaughter Nikki Wheeler Nicholson for your show,
Mm-hmm.
uh, started what became DC Comics. So so the whole history of comics, superheroes, boom. Everybody wants a superhero.
Right.
Um, Eisner but before that they created a lot of stuff. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, the Blackhawks, a lot of different characters, many of which you've heard of, many of which you haven't.
Mm-hmm.
Eisner would sign his name, a different name, to every strip he did to give the impression they had a big staff. He was Willis Renzi, he was W. Morgan Steele, he was but eventually they did get like a large group of people working in almost an assembly line kind of thing with artists and writers uh,
Uh-huh.
at drawing boards. Eisner, though, went out on his own to do for a syndicate, for a small newspaper syndicate
Mm-hmm.
that wanted to cash in on the big superhero craze. They hired him to do a newspaper insert. If you remember newspapers, and you remember Sunday newspapers with like the TV listing insert, or just an advertising insert or a magazine insert. the Spirit section was like that.
Right.
It was 16 pages with a self cover.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that had the Spirit and then several other features by a lot of artists who you might have heard of: Lou Fine, Klaus Nordling, and Jules Feiffer, who was a teenager then, who talked himself into a job at Eisner's
Mm-hmm.
wrote a lot of scripts, drew a lot of stuff. So the Spirit. So Eisner was producing 64 pages of comics a month. Talk about a dead. Oh wait, 18. Yeah. He had to produce a 16-page comic book every week,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot, especially. And he was a pretty good a very good businessman, and an innovative writer and artist. So his stories were just full of atmosphere and drama, and they kind of, a PG rated sort of sex appeal, and the Spirit was this very. He was technically, they called them costumed adventurers or masked adventurers. The word superhero didn't really exist then, but
Mm-hmm.
so the story goes that the syndicate said we want a superhero, and Eisner drew the Spirit. It was a guy who wears a suit and tie and a fedora,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, well, that's not a superhero, or a costumed adventurer or whatever. So Eisner drew a mask on him and gave him gloves, and somehow they accepted that as close enough to being a superhero.
Well,
Uh,
Superman can wear glasses and be
right,
transformed, right?
and he had like a superhero origin. He was Denny Colt, a private investigator
Mm-hmm.
who was in a battle with Doctor Cobra, and he was doused with a chemical solution that they thought killed him, but really put him in suspended animation. Anyway, but then he came back to life. That's why he's called the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, although he wasn't really dead, he was just in suspended animation. Anyway, he became a noir kind of character. If
Mm-hmm.
he did have a superpower, it was just to get beat up a lot, and he could really take a beating.
Right.
Um, but he was charming and unflappable, and Eisner used it as a platform to tell almost different kinds of short stories. There were some stories where the Spirit, no, there were ones where the Spirit was very active, but there
Mm-hmm.
were ones where he was almost a guest in his own book.
Right.
At one point, you're a Daredevil guy, so this might be of interest to you.
Right.
Um, you know, there was a story about the Spirit and a girl he knew as a teenager whose name was Sans Serif. Eisner always did puns like that. Sans Serif is a kind of is typeface.
Right. Yeah.
Sans Serif. Let's say there's many similarities between the origin of Sans Serif and the Spirit. You might find it reminiscent of the Matt Murdock Elektra
I will have to
storyline.
check that out. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
a lot of things, and Eisner was so Eisner loved short stories with O. Henry and Guy de Maupassant type endings.
Mm-hmm.
He was an artist that other artists were inspired by. You know, there was a period when he went into the army and was doing propaganda and informational comics for the army.
Mm-hmm.
So while he was in the army, ironically there were people ghosting the Spirit artists, but very good, Lou Fine and Jack Cole,
Mm-hmm.
some of the greats of the golden age of comics. Um, but for the most part, Eisner did the heavy lifting of the writing and drawing of the strip. But again, with a weekly deadline like that, he often had assistants, but the voice was always his.
Right.
The vision, and he was, especially for the era, head and shoulders over about just about anybody else drawing comics. He had a real gift for the medium, and understood what you could also make use of from cinema,
Mm-hmm.
um, and did. So he was. What the hell was your question? What was?
Well, my question was, what's the Eisner Studios Foundation? What you do for them?
Got it. Okay.
But
Yeah.
I did have a question about who Will Eisner is. So this is
Okay.
actually, it
All right.
works out. We're
All
just
right.
flipping it around. Yeah,
So
but
Eisner. So Eisner. So So it's never in a million papers. It's a small syndicate, but I mean, it's still probably read by several million people every week, maybe
Right.
tens. Because that was the main entertainment and news people got was newspapers. So
Hmm.
every Sunday, 1952, Eisner gives it up and goes full time into doing the corporate and military and other commercial comics. So comic studio for hire again. Mike Plug, Leslie Cabarga,
Hmm.
many people who would go on to be legends themselves worked for Eisner in this studio.
Right.
Um, 1971, Eisner's hearing about these underground comics. He goes to a comic convention. He meets Art Spiegelman, Dennis Kitchen, S.
Hmm.
Clay Wilson, all the giants of underground comics.
Hmm.
He realizes, okay, I'm a middle aged guy. I'm not doing crazy Robert Crumb underground comics, but what Will took away was comics aren't just for kids anymore. To coin a phrase,
Right. Yeah.
that people who grew up who understand the visual syntax of comics
Hmm.
might looks like there might be an audience for a comic, or as he would come to call it, sequential art
Hmm.
that would tell a more mature, and by mature I don't mean pornographic, I mean a mature literary story with more adult story values, and that's what he proceeded to do with his first graphic novel. This is as comics people, so it's an endless debate. What was the first graphic novel? What was the first use of the term? Among the first, and certainly the most high profile of the early graphic novels,
Hmm.
was Will Eisner's A Contract with God.
Right. Right.
And Will didn't stop with one graphic novel. That was 1978. He lived till 2005, and he probably put out about 25 graphic novels over that period, many of which were not the spirit. They were sort of the opposite. It was not action. He did a little bit of action adventure, but
Hmm.
most of it was thinly veiled memoir about Jewish life in New York in the first half of the 20th century. That was
Hmm.
he wanted to be, and some people, including me, consider him the equivalent in comics of Saul Bellow, Bernard Malamud, Philip Roth.
Hmm.
Um, Aside from that, so there's this body of work.
Hmm.
Aside from that, Will became a cheerleader and evangelist for the medium of graphic novels.
Hmm.
Um, he became a friend to and a champion of young people who wanted to express themselves in this medium in ways that weren't superhero comics and that weren't Archie comics. Not there's anything wrong with that, but
Right.
people who had more personal vision. And so Will gave advice, went to librarians conferences and retailers conferences and comic conventions, championing. I mean, there's a book that Paul Levitz wrote called Will Eisner, Champion of the Graphic Novel, because that's we look at it now and we go, well, everybody can see. Look how big manga and graphic novels and Mouse won the Pulitzer Prize, and
Hmm.
Wimpy Kid is popular, and Captain Under. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
Dog man.
Dogman, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
but this was not the case in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, where people still had to be convinced that comics were a legitimate storytelling medium, like movies, like television, like novels,
Hmm.
like painting. And so Will just spent, up to and including, where he lent his name to the Eisner Awards, which are, generally they're considered, the Oscars of the comic industry.
Right.
They're given. I mean, it used to be until he died, you could literally get an Eisner Award from Will Eisner. He was up on stage there.
That's
Uh,
cool. Yeah.
you know, um, so so he died in 2005, and in 2009, I believe, the Carl and Nancy Gropper, who run um, the Eisner Studios and the Will and Ann Eisner Foundation,
Hmm.
decided that they wanted to start here's the deal. Right? I gave you a hard time before, but you told me you have not read any of Eisner's work, and I think there's a lot of people like that who
Right.
who sort of know the name, but they kind of think of it like spinach, not the Popeye version of spinach, or maybe it's not, you know,
Right.
they know that Eisner's work is good for you, but they're not sure why.
Uh-huh.
So it seems. So of course, as Will's descendants, they of course, for both personal and commercial reasons, wanted his work to not be forgotten, but on a very serious level in terms of comic scholarship and comics history, and just letting people know that the work is, this incredible, astonishing body of work. This guy is from that old school, that old Greatest Generation era. Like, it's Monday, I'm at my desk. It's Tuesday. Just boom. And he was very fast and very good, and just did it. In terms of the 12 Years of the Spirit,
Hmm.
um, several textbooks that he wrote.
Hmm.
Also taught for many years at the School of Visual Arts in New York. A lot of your favorite artists were probably trained by Will Eisner.
Right. Right.
Absolutely. Um, so um, so there's this legacy. The foundation and the studio wanted to start something called Will Eisner Week,
Hmm.
which Eisner was born March 7th, 1917. It's celebrated around his birthday. But again, it is a week. Week
Right.
is the name. However, we have been known to celebrate. If somebody has an event they for whatever reason have to do in February all the way through until like early April, whatever. You can brand it Will Eisner Week. We're not gonna look a gift horse in the mouth. So
Right. Right.
you know, but so in 2009 they started with two events. I know, and I think I had done a lecture at Columbia University on Will Eisner,
Hmm.
which was a little, which was sort of funny because it's like an Eisner 101, which and I may be getting two events mixed up, but there was one where Jules Pfeiffer was in the audience. I told him about it.
Oh, cool.
And let me, Jules, when you look up Jules Pfeiffer, you'll see what this
Yeah.
guy done and does. So, I mean, he didn't tell me till the last minute he was coming, which I was grateful for, because I would have been a nervous wreck if I knew he was coming.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm pontificating, Will Eisner this, Will Eisner that, blah, 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 blah. And here's this story, and I'm an expert on it, let me tell you. And Jules
Hmm.
raises his hand and says, uh, I wrote that story when I was 17. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to sit down now.
That's funny.
It was one of the most famous. It's a story called 10 Minutes, one of the most famous Will Eisner story.
Yeah.
You know kind of the premise is, what's 10 minutes in a man's life? And of course, obviously, the story will
Hmm.
demonstrate what 10 minutes in a man's life is. So, but way before, so I think that might be where Carl and Nancy Gropper saw me talk about Eisner. It was a talk, I think, somewhere. Anyway, they asked me to host an event in a basement of Jim Hanley's in New York, and I did that, and then we started talking about how can we expand this, and so it just, because the motto or the mandate of Will Eisner Week is to expand consciousness of Will Eisner and his career, but also of comics and sequential art, the graphic novel, free
Hmm.
speech, and how do we get the word out? So what we've done is we have a network of comic retailers, academics, people in museums, people in bookstores all over the world,
Hmm.
online, and our request from them, is, if can you do an event that branded Will Eisner Week. We're very loose about, we don't approve or disapprove people's content. Can you do
Right.
some kind of event? We'll help you promote it on the Will Eisner website. We will
Hmm.
send you a handbook of things you can do and suggestions. We'll be a clearinghouse for ideas. We have a couple of different. We have an advisory board and an organizing committee. very accomplished people. But the idea is spread the word about comics, spread
Hmm.
about in whatever way, shape, or form. Uh, and if you think of it, spread the word about Will Eisner personally too, because he's the impetus behind us doing this. We'll send you posters. Um, so that and we've it's grown from I think one or two. I think there was a second event in New York the same year,
Hmm.
grown to over 100 events worldwide.
Hmm.
And then, as I say, when the COVID shutdown started, we also created a dozen online videos that people can use in addition to or as their whole program. But we have. I just want to read. If you want to read some of the names of people, we have um, Paul Levitt, Dennis Kitchen, Dan Chikade, uh, Susan Kirtley, who's a professor in Oregon, uh,
Hmm.
Todd McFarlane, Gene Yang, Jerry Kraft. Um, a lot of
Yeah.
people talking about Will Eisner, and some of them giving lessons, talking about different topics.
Hmm.
Um, so the best way to find those is go to YouTube and look up Will Eisner Week, because there's some of the other some because of some of the weird YouTube technical rules. If I give you a link, it doesn't always work. But anyway, so
Right.
so that is what Will Eisner Week is, and it's just terrific, and we do an event. I personally lead an event every year in New York at Ben Catcher's New York Picture Story Symposium, which is put on through Parsons, where Ben, who if you don't know Ben Catcher's work, check that out.
Hmm.
Um, Ben is the recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant for his cartooning.
Oh,
But
great.
he teaches at the New School, which Parsons is a part of,
Right.
and and um, and we're still doing them strictly online through him. But I'm doing something on the March 7th. That wait a minute. That will be actually it's a version of something that we did in San Diego at the San Diego Con. Because in part of
Oh,
what
cool.
I also, sort of my role as chair of Will Eisner Week has evolved to be sort of a general consultant, and then I do panels on behalf of the Eisner Studios and Foundation at San Diego and other conventions.
Hmm.
But so this panel is called Banned Comics: Old Problems, New Forms, and it's going to be on March 7th. It's going to be me, Jeff Smith, who does Bone, of course, Jerry Kraft of New Kid, Dennis Kitchen, who's Dennis Kitchen, Jeff
Hmm.
Trexler, the acting director of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and Michael Dooley, who's a comics professor in Los Angeles, and I'll be moderating. So that's specifically what I'll be doing. But there will, I hope, we will get at least 100 events, and we certainly seem to have them. So what you can do, um, well, now it's February. So it's February. We're recording this in February 5th.
Right.
Um, if you want to do, if and I don't mean just you, I mean if you guys out there
Right.
want to do something and you have a venue to do it, by all means do it. If you want to use some of our material, we also have two terrific documentaries on Will that we can send you to that you can screen. A
Oh, awesome.
portrait of a sequential artist, and the other is Will Eisner, um, occupation cartoonist. They're both terrific. Um,
Is it like you'll send a DVD or something like that, or
no,
is
I,
it
I think a DVD. Although,
okay?
yeah, you
Gotcha.
know, I guess at this point maybe we should start sending links or downloads. But I think a DVD.
Right.
Um, so if you have a store or a library, I know it's a little short notice, but but some people you
Yeah.
know, have not planned things, and so certainly, if you just want to attend, then see if there's something in your community or nearby. But if you want to do something either in person or online, we have these assets, and we would love you to do it. It just I mean, as I say, there's a lot of different Will Eisner, and it's a hell of a career that a guy starts it at like age 22, whatever, 20,
Hmm.
20, 22, and keeps going. Literally, he was working on a graphic novel. He had just finished, just before he died, a graphic novel about modern anti-Semitism,
Oh,
kind of
wow.
a debunking of the that horrific protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a forgery and a fraud, but that people still believe exists.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, they still
That
believe
just
it's
came up,
real.
like, recently, yeah.
Oh well, Eisner did a book called um, "The Protocols." Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, I got to get to the exact title, but now it's called. It is called. Um, maybe it's called. This is embarrassing.
Oh, that's okay.
It's called the plot. The plot. The story of the protocols of the World Designs.
Mhm.
Um, but he was working until just a few days before he died, and he was one of those. There's some people. What I think what made Eisner stand out, from most of his peers, with
Mhm.
maybe Stan Lee would be an exception. A couple other people, Herbie. He never stopped innovating. He never just said, I
Mhm.
figured out a system to draw the figure in action. I figured out a formula to tell a story. He was always trying new things and was always interested in new technology,
Mhm.
online comics, digital art. He was a person who, even though he was, I guess, 87 when he died,
Mhm.
had the curiosity of like a 25-year-old. Despite his accomplishments and and all and fame he had, he never lost interest in what was coming around. The you know best ways for retail. It ranged everywhere because
Right.
he was strong both creatively and in business.
Mhm.
um, sort of that's the classic sort of his parents. His mother was very kind of hard-headed and practical, and his father was kind of a dreamer and an artist. And Will somehow managed to synthesize the two of them. And he had some great tragedy in his life that fueled certainly Contract with God. So so he's not he was not like most 87-year-olds. So that
Right.
when he did die, he had serious heart problems and he'd been in for surgery. Everybody was shocked, right? I mean, there's certain, right, like, sort of, if you just look at just an actuarial table. Okay, 87 years old, heart condition.
Mhm.
You know, shouldn't be shocked, but we were shocked. There are some people, especially in comics, but I guess in a lot of fields. So there's a legacy, there's a body of work,
Mhm.
and it would be work that people, I think, would enjoy and be inspired by. Um, which is why, why we're even talking about him. So that's I think what Will Eisner Week, what I do for them, and
Yeah. Well, Danny, I have to say that, as we talked about before, I'm still, kind of a new person to comics in the sense that I got away from it a long time ago, and now I'm coming
sure.
back and trying to get back into it. And as you mentioned, Will Eisner is one of the people that I've always heard about, but didn't know much about him. And so talking to you about his life and legacy and Will Eisner Week and how we can get involved with it, whether we want to, put on an event to celebrate him or, comic genre or anything like that, and letting us know how we can do that in a lot of different ways. This was very informational, very educational, very enlightening, and I really appreciate learning more from you about this great person that has found the foundation for the comics industry. And so this is really great. And I know that I have a lot of listeners who are also either, new to comics or, wanting to get into comics. And might even have some people that have been reading comics a long time that is maybe same boat as me, that they, may have heard of Will Eisner, but don't know much about him. So this is really great. And I really appreciate that. This is really,
Thank you.
really nice. So
Can I throw in a couple of footnotes quickly?
yeah, yeah.
Um, the Spirit work has all the Spirit has been reprinted in 100 different formats, including in a hardcover DC, whatever the Masterworks thing is. So there's
Right.
that stuff is around, and
Like an
many,
omnibus?
not an omnibus, not that size, but
Okay.
more like the Masterworks format. But whatever
Oh,
DC.
gotcha. Okay.
But those have been. It's called the Will Eisner Library or the Spirit Library. Um, and the graphic novels are in print. You can certainly find Contract with God and To the Heart of the Storm and The
Hmm.
Plot. Um, a footnote I did want to put in about the Jules Feiffer book, Great Comic Book Heroes. It originally came out in a fairly large size coffee table format with large size reproductions of the comics, including that Spirit story.
Hmm.
There's also an edition that I think Fantagraphics put out that's just Jules Pfeiffer's text, which is great.
Right.
But just be aware, if you get that version, you won't get the reprinted comics.
Right.
So, just I would hate for somebody to go, boy, Danny made that sound so great, and I got this Fantagraphics one that's used copy for whatever. It's like, wait a minute, there's no comics in here,
Yeah. No, that makes sense. No, yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that. So that's good. Now, Danny, you also, to kind of switch gears from talking about Will Eisner to some of your work currently, um, you're working on a Jack Ruby book, and you also, as you mentioned before, you're a biographer of Stan Lee. I want to give you the opportunity because I know you said you wanted to share that a little bit. What do you want to share with us about the work that you have with Stan Lee and your current work about Jack Ruby coming out on comics?
Jack Ruby, not Jack Kirby. Just want to be sure
Right,
people.
right. Jack Ruby and not Kirby.
Although Jack Kirby once drew a story about Jack Ruby.
Oh,
He did for Esquire magazine.
yeah.
Well, just look. I have this interest in these founders of comics, obviously,
Hmm.
um, and Stan Lee was in that group, starting
Hmm.
out like Eisner as a teenager. So I wrote a biography in 2019 that came out in 2019
Hmm.
called "A Marvelous Life: The Amazing Story of Stan Lee." There's other biographies. Mine was the first that came out after he died. And I like to think that I knew Stan. I was friendly with him. I worked with him quite a bit, but I wouldn't consider myself in his inner circle, which I think in some ways makes me the perfect person to write a biography of Stan Lee as an insider in the comic book business who knows how the sausage gets made,
Right.
and admired and liked Stan. But I think, you know, I tried to not write a hagiography. I tried to write a reasonably, I guess for lack of a better term, fair and balanced, but a real, not putting neon signs and dramatic organ music to anything good or bad he did, but sort of laying out the information. Not everybody agrees. Some people, you know, just think that because I worked at Marvel, it's impossible for me to be objective. I think they're wrong. There have been other views of Stan that are perhaps not that kind.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, I did that book, and I'm proud of that. And I think because Stan started in the comic business in 1940 at age 17, it also becomes a history of the comic book business in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
With Stan as the focus, and sort of explains, sort of the differences and the similarities between him and a Will Eisner, for instance.
Right.
Um, so I had in the book some of the last interviews ever done with Stan. I can't say, since he was interviewed by somebody new every other day, I can't claim they're the last, but I think they're the some of the later ones by someone who understood what he did for a living in comics, as opposed to someone who might just have known him as the guy from the cameos.
Hmm.
Anyway, so it's called A Marvelous Life: The Amazing Story of Stan Lee. And if you've enjoyed this interview and my lovely voice, well, I also did the audiobook. So imagine 14 hours of this in your headphones or in your car.
Right.
How could you not? You know, that did disabuse me. I used to think I didn't have much of a New York accent, but people will compliment me and they'll say, "Oh, we really love that audiobook, especially your genuine New York accent." And so I think I have one. Also, just another quick sales pitch. my two earlier books, Disguised as Clark Kent and Superman on the Couch, although they
Hmm.
came out quite a while ago, I only did the audiobooks for them last year.
Oh, okay.
So those are available at all the usual sources. Um, I then figured I'd been pitching for a long time with an artist named Rick Geary,
Hmm.
a graphic novel about Jack Ruby, who was the guy who killed Lee Harvey Oswald in that very famous picture.
Hmm.
Of course, Oswald is the guy who was the presumed assassin of John F. Kennedy. Let's not get into that, but anyway. Uh,
Right.
so Ruby was a really weird, strange, interesting guy, and I decided, well, now that I've written a biography of somebody in comics, and that's been written, and my other books are historical in nature. I wanted to try to write something to see if I could write a biography of somebody who's not a comics world
Hmm.
figure. And again, so now the 60th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination is coming up, and Ruby is a figure that everybody knows the name, everybody knows the image, but a lot of people don't know much about him. And he had a really crazy life, and because he was in show business, even though it was the strip club business in Dallas, he ended up knowing a lot of oddly, Jack Ruby's life intersects with a lot of celebrities. So I do not solve the mysteries of the Kennedy assassination. I did not think that I was. Maybe that'll be my next book. But this book, I just wanted to. I mean, when you write a book about anything involving the Kennedy assassination, you have to obviously touch on them and talk about them. But I really wanted to talk about this guy, and I have some interviews and journals of people from that era, including Jack's rabbi, who visited him on a
Oh,
regular basis.
yeah.
Um, and so I think it's I've just finished writing the first draft and sent it into my editor, and it'll be out from Chicago Review Press in the fall, in time for the anniversary. So that's the Jack Ruby book. So I'm curious to see if I succeeded or not in doing something that's about somebody who's not in comics. The Stan Lee book is from St. Martin's Press, Macmillan, by the way.
I
So that
gotcha.
and then I have a bunch of and then actually I'm an ongoing consultant to the Marvel traveling exhibition that's been in different cities all over the country.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I think it's in Columbus, Ohio now, but it's been in Seattle, Philadelphia,
yeah.
in Canada. It's a terrific exhibition. You know, I mean, again, I can't be. It's a really comprehensive exhibition, uh,
Right.
including some rare comic art and as a curatorial consultant, as was Andy Innocenti, who you must know as a Daredevil fan, uh, um, and uh, curated by a professor from Oregon, who I'm embarrassed to be blanking on his name. With the oh boy,
That's okay.
it's a pretty well. It's not okay with me that I'm.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Oh, by Ben Saunders. By Ben Saunders.
Okay, gotcha.
Anyway, it's an exhibition that gets that since it has comics people like me and Annie, and also academic people who really know their comics history. It's not just, oh, these cool movies are out, here's stuff about the movies. It's like, here's where the movies began, and
Uh-huh.
what Stan Lee contributed, and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. It it's a comprehensive exhibition. So if
Right.
even if you think you know everything, I think there's stuff in the exhibition you don't know or haven't seen.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that's the end of
Well,
the
I was about to say we actually had Matthew Smith on the show, who I guess helped put that
right.
together as well too. So it's kind of interesting how it went full circle with
Smith, and then Randy Duncan was the other one.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. We had a great conversation with him, and he talked to us about that
Yeah,
traveling exhibition, and I need to go visit sometime. Columbus is not that far away from where I'm at and everything, and I've been
yeah,
meaning to. But yeah, it's just kind of funny when you're talking about. I was like, that's what Matt was talking about.
yeah. And Ann and I co-edited the catalog. So if you go
Yes.
catalog, then yeah, no, Matt, yeah, all those guys are just, yeah, they're all people passionate about comics and know their comics
Hmm.
history. Um, so yeah, no, it's if you it'll hopefully be coming to a city near you. But if you're anywhere near Columbus, try to get to it, because
Yeah.
you never know with these things where they're going next, or
Right. Right.
Um, so that's
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you very much, Danny. I had a great time having you on the show and talking to you about your work, about Will Eisner, and Will Eisner Week. Before I let you go, where can we find you and your work online?
DannyFingeroth.com, pretty clever, eh? And my main social media thing is Facebook. That would be
Gotcha.
the main way to get me. So
Awesome.
that would be it. Well, look, thank you. This was great fun. And yeah, and Will Eisner, and WillEisner.com to find everything about Will Eisner and about Will Eisner Week. If you go to the homepage down on the left side, there's a whole sidebar uh,
Hmm.
of links. But like I say, if you want the videos, they're great to watch anyway. The link is weird because it's some weird YouTube thing that I don't understand. But if you go
Hmm.
to just look up YouTube videos, I'm sorry, not YouTube videos, Will Eisner Week videos, or even just Will Eisner videos on YouTube, you'll find a bunch of that stuff.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to include those links in the show notes as well, too. So, Danny,
Okay.
thanks again, and
Thank
best of
you.
luck to your book. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
And that wraps up another episode of The Caption Life. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You can follow us on social media at Caption Life. For more information about us and all of our previous episodes, visit thecaptionlife.com.